This is to document a theory of the parentage of Carlton Arden Geer. I am the great-granddaughter of Byron Lister Geer, and my second great-grandfather is Carlton Arden Geer. Until now, he's been a dead end in family trees because we have documentation about his life, but none of those documents ever show his parents' names, sibling names, or an actual birthday. We know that he was born in 1831 in Chautauqua County, New York, and that we lose track of him. In fact, there's no record of him prior to his marriage to Elizabeth Rolfe when he was 20 years old. So the question has always been, who were his parents? What was his mother's name? Until DNA research became available for genealogists, that remained a dead end because documentation just doesn't seem to be out there. At least not yet. So using DNA, I was able to find some families that lived in the Chautauqua County area that were candidates as possible parents of Carlton Geer. For so long we have searched, my mother, my cousin and I, and others, for any clue that would lead to Carlton's birth parent names or anything that will show us where he came from. And it wasn't until I found this couple, Samuel Geer and Jemima Barnes, that I really got excited that I might be onto something. They had 12 children, and most of their children's families were well documented, and there wasn't any Carlton in the family. But there were a couple of sons that were not documented very well, including Alanson, who died in 1834 when Carlton would have been 3 years old, and he was married to Clarissa Hutchins. It made sense somehow that possibly he and Clarissa Hutchins had a son, Carlton, but I didn't see any record of that. The only record, and there are very few, were census records. But let's back up a little bit. So Alanson and Clarissa were very strong possible suspects as the parents of Carlton Geer for several reasons. There's DNA support, and there's also some documentation that supports the theory. Alanson was the son of Samuel Geer and Jemima Barnes. Samuel Geer is actually a dead end right now. There is another Samuel Geer born right around the same time who married a Lucy Tracy and was in the family of George Geer and Sarah Allen from the 1600s in England, and many Geers in New England were descended from that couple. This Samuel Geer may not be from that family line. So we don't know who his parents are right now, but we know that Alanson's mother, Jemima Barnes, we know a lot about her family. I've built the tree up pretty far, and it's a pretty well documented family. We have DNA connections. When I say we, I mean myself, my mother, my aunt, my cousins, a lot of people who descended from Carlton Geer. I have those DNA kits. So those relatives of mine have DNA connections to Jemima Barnes' ancestors. So we know that we are related in some way to the people above Jemima Barnes. We also know that we're related to Jemima Barnes and Samuel Geer because we have DNA connections to people who descended from their other children. We have cousin relationships to their children. That's a really strong bit of evidence right there. Here are a few of the examples of other members on Ancestry who are related to myself and other family members who are directly descended from Samuel Geer and Jemima Barnes through one of their other children. We also have some census data that supports the theory. So after Alanson died when Carlton was 3, Clarissa had 2 children, Carlton and his little sister Helen. Clarissa remarried Stephen Ludlow, who happened to be related to the Rolfe family through the Coltrane connection, which I can show you later. Clarissa remarried Stephen Ludlow, and in 1834 they began having more children. They have Charles, and then Frank, and Elvira, and Candace. So they have more children. So if you look at the census information, This might be kind of hard to see on the screen, but this is the census document for the household of Stephen Ludlow and Clarissa in 1840. It shows that there was in the family household one male under 5. That would have been their newborn infant Charles. One male between 5 and 9 would be Carlton, age 9. One male between 20 and 30, that would be Stephen. He would have been in his 20s. One female between the ages of 5 and 10, that would be Helen. She would have been 6. And one female between 30 and 40, that would have been Clarissa, who would have just turned 30. Total family member composition, 5 people. This is the 1850 census for the same family. Helen is 16, and not surprisingly, Carlton is not in the household, since he would have been 19 and an adult. By the time he was 20, he was living in Wisconsin with his new wife. One thing that's interesting, though, is that Helen was born in North Carolina, as we see here. So it makes us wonder if maybe Clarissa and Alanson lived in North Carolina for a while, though Carlton's birth record shows him as being born in Chautauqua County, New York. People did move around back then. So even though Carlton is not in the household in 1850, this census document still supports the theory and doesn't conflict with it. Other information that supports the theory are in the names you can see in these families. Clarissa's great-grandmother's name was Bethia Carlton. They often name their children after family members, and after reading about her, they were involved in the Revolution, and she was a strong character in the family, and I believe that it would make sense for Clarissa to have named her son Carlton after her great-grandmother. Carlton named his son William Alonzo Geer, and his nickname was Alanson, according to family history. Alanson sounds a lot like Alanson. So there's another family name similarity. Also, you have the fact that because Clarissa married Stephen Ludlow, who is related to the Rolfes, it kind of makes sense that that's how Carlton would have met Betsy. That might be why we don't see much information about Alanson. He died, and his son, this is all theory, his son was raised by his stepfather, Stephen Ludlow. There are a lot of reasons why this story works. Clarissa's second husband, Stephen Ludlow, was related to the Rolfe family. The Rolfe family, let me show you what I mean. Stephen Ludlow's great-grandfather was William Coltrane. And if we go back now to Clarissa Hutchins, who I believe was Carlton's mother, Carlton married Betsy Rolfe, and she had Coltranes in her family. In fact, William Coltrane was Betsy's ancestor as well. So Betsy was related to Stephen Ludlow. They were first cousins a couple times removed. So that tells me that the families were connected. And that could explain, I mean, think of it. Alanson dies, Clarissa marries Stephen Ludlow. Years later, her son grows up and marries a relative of Stephen Ludlow because they all know each other and live in the same area. There's DNA support for this theory too, because I have found cousins who have ancestors who are the ancestors of Clarissa Hutchins, and I have found cousins who have ancestors, now follow me, this is Carlton's father, Alanson Geer, theoretically, and Carlton's grandmother, Jemima Barnes. I've built the tree up, the Barnes tree up, pretty extensively, and have found a number of DNA cousins who have ancestors in that Barnes section. So we have DNA connections to Carlton's paternal family through his grandmother's side, and we have DNA connections to Carlton's maternal family on both sides of his mother's family. So we have DNA connections to Hutchins, and we have DNA connections to the Rices and the Dutchers. So there's really no question about a connection, but how these are all connected, that part is still theory, but I think it's a pretty strong theory. The reason I'm not talking about a DNA connection to Samuel Geer right now is because he may or may not be related to the Geer family that descended from George Geer and Sarah Allen. It's hard to say whether or not we have a connection to that family through the Geer side or through the Rolfe side, because Elizabeth is remotely connected through like a ninth degree to that Geer family. So because of that ambiguity and the difficulty of looking at the DNA and parsing it out, I'm focusing really on the ones that are easier to narrow down. That would be Alanson's mother's family and Clarissa's mother and father's family, in order to show that there's a connection to this couple, which would support their being our ancestors. So here we are on Ancestry.com looking at Elizabeth Rolfe in a pedigree view in order to show her connection to the Coltrane. So Betsy was the daughter of William Colton Rolfe, who was the daughter of Senna Rolfe, daughter of Elisha, who is the son of John, who is the son of William James Coltrane. Now this is the same ancestor as Betsy's father-in-law, Stephen Ludlow. So let's hop over to Stephen Ludlow. He was the son of Sally Coltrane, the daughter of John, the son of William Coltrane, who was the common ancestor with Betsy Rolfe. So they were first cousins a few times removed. There were a number of cousin marriages among the Rolfes, Lesters, and Coltranes. I don't think it was that uncommon at the time because there were fewer people living in areas. But it does support the theory about this family keeping marriages in the family. Not only was Betsy related to her father-in-law, but also her parents were first cousins, and Deborah Jane Lester and William Rolfe were first cousins, and Deborah Jane Lester's mother, Prudence Rolfe, if you look at her family, her grandparents, Thomas Lester and Mary Ellen, were also first cousins. So there you have it. They kept it all in the family. This is an example of one of the many DNA connections I have found to support the theory. Looking at Clarissa Hutchins' family, we see the names of her grandparents, Palatia Rice and Mary Dutcher. Looking at the DNA results for my mother, if I search for the name Dutcher, I come up with a number of hits. Scrolling down to about the fourth cousin, I see a Martha Young. And there are quite a few others, by the way. But if I go to Martha Young's match, I can see that she has the name Rice and Dutcher in her tree. The way she has the parentheses around them, they don't show up here. So I had to scroll down to find it. And I see that she has a Mary Dutcher, and it happens to be the same Mary Dutcher. And opening Martha Young's tree, I see that it is the same Palatia Rice and Mary Dutcher that was in Clarissa's tree. These are Martha Young's third great-grandparents. So going back to Clarissa's tree, again we see those were her grandparents. So looking at the tree again from this view, sort of put it into context, Carlton being the son of Alanson and Clarissa. Our family has DNA cousin connections to Alanson's siblings. My family has a number of DNA connections to Jemima Barnes' family, okay, the Barnes and the Darrows up here. We also have DNA connections to Clarissa Hutchins' family. So how would you explain that any other way, really? Add to that they're in Chautauqua County. Add to that the census documents for Clarissa Hutchins when she was married to Stephen Ludlow support the presence of a boy that was Carlton's age in the household. Add to that the name commonalities with Alanson and his son Alanson, and the name Carlton being in her family. And yeah, I think we have found Carlton's parents. I hope this is true because my mom and my cousin Sharon and I have worked really hard in search of Carlton's parents. And a discovery like this belongs to everybody who collaborated. I hope that if anybody sees any other explanation for this, they'll come forward and let me know if there's something I missed, because I don't really see how we could explain these kind of connections any other way. So there you have it, and let me know if you have any questions. My contact information is below this video.